What's up everybody, Brian Tong here outside of Apple's Visitor Center. And you know, I have been traveling a lot, Japan, LA, New York, LA, now here in the Bay. But I haven't had time to actually do a video and break down this whole thing where Apple has officially delayed Apple Intelligence. And I think it's safe to say, when you look at it in its entirety, it has been a lukewarm response to Apple Intelligence. All the features have not come out. We don't actually even know if the features they showed us at WWDC last year, how far along they were, because now Apple's saying it might be around a year until they come out. So let's just dig into this. I know that I'm disappointed by this. We know people inside of Apple are disappointed about it, and I've definitely heard your comments. So let's just first show you the statement that Apple said. So in this statement to Daring Fireball, an Apple spokesman said, Siri helps our users find what they need and get things done quickly. And in just the past 6 months, we've made Siri more conversational, introduced features like Type to Siri and Product Knowledge, and added an integration with ChatGPT. We've also been working on a more personalized Siri, giving it more awareness of your personal context, as well as the ability to take action for you within and across your apps. It's going to take us longer than we thought to deliver on these features, and we anticipate rolling them out in the coming year. So now that we have that official statement, you saw it all. Obviously, they gloat about what they've done so far, but the biggest thing to me is in the coming year. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to see personal context in 2025. That could roll out as far as 2026. And again, the response, like we know generative features like Genmoji and Image Playground, those have not been embraced by not only me, but others. It's just been a real slog, and maybe the excitement and the promise that we hoped would come together just hasn't come together. So basically, the most important, the most crucial feature of iOS 18 that was gonna make it different, that was gonna make Apple Intelligence really Apple's first foray and statement to the world of this is how we're doing artificial intelligence, is not happening at all. So let's just kind of break down some of the things that were promised that we aren't seeing. So with personal context, Siri was able to connect all the dots between the apps and the information on your phone. Things like keeping track of your email, messages, photos, and files. You could maybe say something to Siri like, hey, show me the files that Eric sent me last week, or find an email where my mom mentioned going to dinner at a Japanese spot. None of that stuff happened or has happened. They weren't actually even able to really show us concrete examples in the demo. And I'm gonna say this because I've criticized companies at CES for this. If they advertised it and it's basically going to be a year and it hasn't happened, was that vaporware? I know it's strong language, but was the wool pulled over our eyes that this stuff didn't actually exist? It was just kind of like mocked up renders. I'm not saying that I know this, because I know a lot of people behind the scenes, people that are 10 times smarter than me, 20 times smarter than me, let's be honest, are working on this night and day. But what they showed the public and what showed us and made us believe literally has not materialized at all. Another feature here, on-screen awareness, where it would actually be able to see what's on my screen and take care of, I guess, actions involving what I'm looking at by reading the screen. We have nothing even remotely close to that on iOS 18 at all. Remember, iOS 18 was a slow rollout. Even in iOS 18, the first release, there were no Apple Intelligence features. Okay, that was kind of a little bit of a red flag. Then we got to iOS 18.1, where we got the revamped Siri with the glow. We got some writing tools, a few other things. It wasn't until 18.2 where we got Genmojis and Image Playground. Then we were promised in 18.4 to see personal context, but that didn't happen. And that's where we started asking questions like, where is this stuff? Well, some of the stuff that I've just mentioned still has not happened. Another feature that we still haven't seen, how about this deeper app integration? So doing things like moving files from one app to another app, editing a photo and then sending it to someone, or getting directions from home, sharing it, giving the ETA across different apps, right? So these in-app actions where it's third-party apps and Apple's apps being able to talk to each other, that has also not happened. So obviously a lot of things have not been happening, and let's rewind, because I remember on my podcast, I do it every week, after WWDC, my first thing was, you have to remember, when that announcement was made, this was a climate where OpenAI was just pushing out ChatGPT, Google had just pushed out Gemini. We were seeing companies really do big things in the AI space, and Apple was clearly trailing. So my feeling was like, hey, is this kind of a reaction, a late reaction? Because it did feel like Apple was taken by surprise of how this AI, I mean, let's call it a movement or push was happening around them, and they were kind of still focusing on products and not actual AI. Now again, we know that AI has always existed, right? This is computer machine learning behind the scenes, but it became this almost like this marketing buzzword that companies had to show that they had value in this space. And Apple Intelligence seemed like maybe a quick response to that, because most of the time when you think about products when they come out, it takes about 2 to 3 years before they're actually polished, before they're actually ready to come to the consumer. And we're now looking at this delay where year one, maybe Apple Intelligence, finally the form that we saw at WWDC in iOS 18 comes to fruition in 2026. That would be 2 years, but I think optimistically, if you want to see Apple's true vision, that might be 2027. So again, that product life cycle of 2 to 3 years shows me that Apple kind of rushed this out, and clearly this delay shows that it just wasn't ready for prime time. And then here's where this might be Apple's biggest sin with this whole Apple fiasco. So WWDC happens. iOS 18 is starting to come out. They were putting out TV commercials. I don't know if you saw this one. Apple actually took this commercial down, but it was Bella Ramsey from Last of Us and Game of Thrones, and it was a spot specifically where she was like at some social gathering, and she sees someone in the distance, and she looks at her phone and says,
"Siri, what's the name of the guy I had a meeting with a couple of months ago at Cafe Grinnell?"
You met Zach Wingate at Cafe Grinnell.
Hey!
Zach!
Oh, wow, I didn't think you'd remember me.
Yeah, of course. As soon as I saw you, I'm like, it's Zach. Nobody looks like Zach.
I am genius.
okay, that was complete vaporware, but this is the problem to me. That was an ad that was on mainstream television. It was all over the internet, and Apple was selling this as a promise to consumers that this is what iOS 18 was going to be. And I remember watching that and I said, that's not even real. And guess what? They took it down. So I'm sorry, you know what's coming. That's a bad Apple. To me, it's pretty deceptive that they were almost so brash that they felt that they could do that. And now, again, the feature doesn't exist. I think that's pretty damning evidence of where we're at, but also it was, to me, sure, show off Genmoji, show off Image Playground, but don't show us a feature that literally doesn't exist and is now being delayed arguably for over a year. Don't do that. And I also think I'm being very fair here, right? This is almost like what you would expect a company with Apple's reputation, who, when they've typically built products, developed them, this whole idea of like the Apple fit and finish, that polish. But this is an instance where they didn't, but they were maybe even forced to lean into it because they felt like they were a little behind in this, air quotes, AI race, and they really didn't need to. I also think of, okay, iPhone 16 Pro and 16. The actual physical hardware did not change that much at all, and the biggest selling point for it was, hey, Apple Intelligence. And I remember in my reviews, I told people, if you're looking at this phone, it's not worth the upgrade. Just if you're saying, hey, Apple Intelligence is the reason to upgrade, it's not. But these ads and the way they were marketing it, they were making it or positioning it as the reason to upgrade. Now, here's the other thing that I want to talk about. Not only did they take down that TV ad, Apple has also been removing references to personal context and all this personalization on their website when it comes to specific points that they are making. So for example, in references to iOS, iPadOS, and macOS, before there would be a statement that said, with richer language understanding and awareness of your personal context, Siri is more capable and helpful than ever. Well, now, after they've taken this stuff down, it says, with richer language understanding and expansive product knowledge about your devices, Siri is more helpful than others. So personal context has been completely stripped from that. And I know some of you might feel like I'm digging in on them, but I just think there's things that have happened with Apple Intelligence that are fundamentally opposite of how Apple is operated, which has been more surprising to me than not. And yes, I'm never going to discredit the people behind the scenes that are working on this stuff, because it is not easy. People have been trying to crack this nut of artificial intelligence as a personal assistant for over a decade, and no one has. And even with Siri, we know that if you look at the industry, people have, it's plain and clear, Siri has been behind. I mean, you look at iOS 17 was the first time we finally got to do multiple timers on Siri after all these years. And Amazon's Alexa rose because it was on a lot of cheaper devices, but it kind of did what you needed to do. It also did more than what Siri did. So Siri also needs a significant revamp, has always needed a revamp, and we've been waiting for it, but it still just hasn't happened. I just think this is a moment where with Apple, you know, they didn't make this big public announcement. They sent their statement to someone who has covered Apple historically. But this is them kind of taking a slice of some of that humble pie for the first time because they were so brash about it. So I think the next thing to talk about, after all, you know, laying out the context and some of these criticisms, what's next for Apple, right? There have been reports, I think, by Reuters that said, oh, 2026 is when we'll potentially see personal context. We'll wait and see. Their quote said, coming in the next year, which does not deliberately say 2025. So it gives them some legroom to polish this up. I think no matter what, right now, after all this has happened, they've got to release at least what they promised in iOS 18 and then go from there. Let's not reach for the stars and not deliver and basically throw out something that looks like vaporware at the time. Also, remember, I talked about Siri and how it needs to get better. It just needs to go through a complete transformation. They hired John G and Andrea a long time ago, and the hope was that Siri would be built from the ground up, right? This is a system that came out with if I recall, the iPhone 4S. Apple actually led the pack when it came to a voice assistant, and it kind of just stayed the same and really didn't do much, maybe little tweaks here and there. It got on some other devices, but it fundamentally has not changed. So Siri needs a huge revamp, and even Bloomberg's Mark Gurman is saying, hey, the next generation of Siri might be coming in iOS 20 in 2027. So look, when you talk about this product development, 2 to 3 years, guess what? If Apple first said, hey, we're gonna start really approaching Apple Intelligence, they did that last year. 2 to 3 years is either 2026 or 2027. So look, unfortunately, it has been not the best year one of Apple Intelligence, but again, Apple is always in it for the long play. They can turn things around, but it just might take a lot longer than they expect, than we expect. I mean, I think I'll let the comments show the general consensus because I'm just one person who thinks this way. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments because I think that we have been in general disappointed with Apple Intelligence overall because personal context hasn't been delivered. I think Apple knows that as well. It's no secret to them. And we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens. But this has been maybe not the brightest chapter in the Apple story for the iPhone, and we'll see what happens at WWDC this year and with the iPhone and beyond. But that's my take. The Apple Intelligence delay is a real thing, but it was really more than anything for me just disappointing how this whole story has gone in. Apple, it's time to redeem yourselves on this one. But you know what? Apple is not going away. To me, they are like the 900-pound gorilla in tech. They are always going to be there. They're not going to go away, but they're going to have their bumps and bruises up, and you know this road is going to go up and down. But Apple Intelligence, you got to fix that, and we'll see what happens next.